get started. This is Church Talk, episode number 16, where the topic is succession and the church, part 2. And I'm going to let the participants of the panel briefly introduce themselves, their titles, and the church they represent. We'll start with Pastor Brookins.
Well, praise the Lord, everybody. This is Pastor Tobaise Brookins, pastor of the Bethesda churches of Freson. One church, 2 locations, and just delighted to be here. God bless.
Yes, sir. Pastor Walters.
My name is Pastor Chino Walters, pastor and established Unitarian of Greater Morning Star Apostolic Church in Waldorf, Maryland. I've been pastoring for 10 years now, and we're just looking forward to this conversation, and I'm willing to learn some things and to contribute as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. Pastor Hairston.
Yes, sir. Associate Pastor Terry Hairston. I've been an associate pastor here at Pentecostal Covenant Church probably for the last 5 years. My father, Suffragan Bishop Wilford Hairston, is the senior pastor. So I'm in supportive role of him here at Pentecostal Covenant Church.
Good. Mr. Parchia.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation. Bishop Parchia, I started church in Anchorage, Alaska, and 4 churches later, I'm doing prayer ministry, and we have about 50 churches in the Philippines where I'm working as presider. That's my reformation, as also consecrating pastors here. I have 5 from California to Florida, but we have an international ministry hooked up with probably about 6 different other groups who have, I would say, missions-minded people. It's a mission-minded prayer line I've had for 12 years now. And so we have missions in Tanzania, Uganda. We're building a church in Malawi, Africa, one of my pastors. And also we're hooked up just around the world in different missions. I don't want to get too detailed in it, but we're in different places, and we have orphanage in Uganda and Tanzania that we're working with, and we just got a group that come in from Colombia, Azerbaijan. We're in India with 2 churches there, and as well as in Liberia. So trying to stay busy.
So first I want to start off with each one of you all, in your observation, do you believe there is, I'll say within the past 15 to 20 years, looking at succession. So churches that have started either before the 80s, we'll say the 80s, 90s, and 2000s are now currently, for the most part, being pastored by those that are in their 60s and 70s. And so the conversation and this wave of conversation about succession has really become heavy in the last few years. And so just a brief, your brief input about your observation about succession in the church. Pastor Brookins.
Well, praise the Lord. So you said 15 years. I think I can probably go a little further back than that. I'd like to kind of put in the space that as men, and now, women are pastoring as well. But as men, we tend to not respect really our vulnerabilities in connecting to each generation. And because I always felt like I could connect, and the dad before me felt like he could always connect, because it's the gospel, right? And the gospel is transcendent and hits all cultures, all backgrounds, all lifestyles. And so as a man of the cloth, you don't realize that your time of connection in the same manner as it was has changed. And so you don't build up another generation or 2 generations behind you to be prepared to be active enough in whatever sphere of influence that you have to make an impact in terms of winning souls. And so two things that I've seen happen. One, you have very capable people who end up leaving because they feel like they're not being used properly or not given an opportunity to make an impact. And many of them are not church hoppers. They don't want to leave. It's just that there's nothing in the vision that would allow for them to use their managerial skills, their pastoral skills, their innovation in a way that would actually bless the whole church. And so they leave out. And every time someone leaves out, it stunts the ability for succession. So, like if Terry were to decide to leave out from his father's church, his father probably doesn't have 5 Terrys laying around. And so now he has to kind of figure out what to do in his 70s. Like, how do I get a shepherd who has my heart, who has my blueprint, who has my thumbprint into this system? Because every church, we're encouraging the ecclesia, the local body. And I know that there's kind of a teaching out there, about the kingdom, and I do understand the kingdom, but that's being used to say that I can float from place to place and never build where the Lord has planted me. And ultimately, it leads to men of God not having a suitable successor, nor a people ready for a succession plan, and churches dying. So I'll stop there.
Pastor Hairston.
Yeah, Pastor Tobaise was going so good. I was just enjoying what he was saying. So can you reiterate the question for me? Because Pastor Tobaise says some really good stuff that I could just piggyback off of. But what was the question again?
The question is, in your observation in the past, let's say 15 to 20 years, what has been your observation of succession in the church? Has it been effective, a lack of? What are some of the things that you have witnessed?
Yeah, so I can concur with my brother, Pastor Tobaise, and that's my guy, like, from back here in, Grace Apostolic days. But, I think he's right. We've seen, I think we've seen more succession planning, but we haven't seen enough. I think we have pastors, especially like you talked about the older generation, that want to be carried out instead of walked out. And I think Pastor Tobaise made a great observation. A lot of times people, we think we are reaching the younger generation. We think we can connect with them, and we haven't, and we don't. I was listening to Bishop Noel Jones just last week. He says he has an expiration date, and he says, my expiration date, I'm past, and I don't reach the younger generations like I used to. And though he says the only way he can connect to further his expiration date is to mentor the younger ones. And mentoring doesn't mean, they follow you and you tell them what to do, but you really hear them, you understand them, and you're able to love and respect the different era, the different generations, and the different ministries they have. I think succession planning, for the most part, has been lacking in the church, especially the Black church, because like I said earlier, we've grown accustomed to dying in the pulpit instead of moving on and turning it over. I'm in a fortunate situation where I'm been set up to succeed my father and here helping him. But Pastor Tobaise also made a great comment about how we don't allow, when we don't have succession planning, we don't allow for other talent, other giftings to come forward. And it's not just in the pastorate. It's in, how do you have a succession for your next worship leader? How do you have succession for your next program leaders, for your next ministries? Who's going to run the food bank, the youth departments, the the senior ministry.
Mhm.
And what happens is we don't set up a succession plan. And when someone leaves, like Pastor Tobaise was saying, it stunts the growth because we have not created a succession plan, but we also have not given other people the opportunity to grow and to grow into their giftings and to mature into that. And then, you know, we don't even have the understanding, how do we make it applicable for someone who's a wallflower, or someone who's sitting in back? How do we reach them? Will we even find out what their talents or giftings are? And how do we reach that? And I think a successful church has that in place, where we're growing people and maturing them and giving them a place to grow and to be in leadership. Pastor, on down.
Good. Thank you, Pastor Hairston. Pastor Walters.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree with Pastor Brookins and Pastor Hairston in regards to the challenges that certainly Black Pentecostal churches face. To your question, you know, within the last 10 to 15 years, 15 to 20 years, if you will, it certainly has been more of a reactive approach than proactive. Of course, that is the result of a lack of, you know, qualified leaders, you know, as the pastors were saying, you know, more so developing in-house. And, you know, I think Pastor Brookins hit the nail on the head. You know, many of us are just one good leader away from not having anyone to replace us. And unfortunately, it's a cultural thing within our organizations, especially within our Black Pentecostal churches. And I think that we have to be more proactive than reactive. In these last, you know, 10 years, we have seen, you know, pillars, you know, we've seen staples in the community crumble because there was nothing in place, and then there was no development, you know, before executing that particular succession plan, if you will. And so I think for the Black Pentecostal church, we have to be more proactive. And the only way we can be more proactive is understanding, as Pastor Hairston and Pastor Brookins said, that there is an expiration date on us. I often say this, you know, I've spoken to pastors across the United States, even in my study and my research. And one thing that I share with the pastors is that the moment we become pastors, that's the moment we are coming out of office. And so we have to transition our thinking that, you know, we're not going to always be in this position as a senior pastor forever. And we have to accept the fact that we won't always be able to reach the generation that we once reached. And so, you know, I served as a youth pastor before. And, you know, I was able to reach that younger generation. Well, my time as a youth pastor is over. You know, it's not that I cannot reach the younger generation, but I have to be mindful that even as my ministry matures, I have to have someone in place to continue the development and the fortification of the ministry. And so I think, you know, when it comes to the Black Pentecostal churches, we just have to learn to take both generations, the ones that are going out and the ones that are up and coming, and mesh that together so we can ensure that our churches, of course, we know this is the Lord Church, but our churches, the local churches, are thriving after that senior pastor or that founding pastor retires or ultimately dies.
Good. Thank you, Pastor Walters. And Bishop Parchia, before you go, I'm just observing your background. It looks like that portion of the wall right there, I know it's anointed. I'm looking at the pictures. I see your father, Bishop Parchia, Bishop Montgomery, and Bishop Norman Wagner. So that's that's a powerful wall. Just making that observation.
Well, I was trying to position so you could see that, because these men put so much into me, took time with me, and sat down with me. So I like to come from that historical position. I'm glad you brought that out. I want to come from learning from history and the historical context and the historical paradigm, and just talking about my own experience and what I've observed. I probably could write a book. I've been urged to by several, even not just on PAW, but just what I observed working with bishops. I've been evangelistic director. You mentioned my evangelism. Evangelistic director for 4 bishops, including there in Tacoma as well as in Georgia. Bishop Reese is on the other side. Bishop Reese is also on that wall. Started out ministry under him, and of course my dad. And so I've been around the country, maybe 4 or 5 states that I've resided in, either pastoring or working with pastors to establish evangelistic outreach. So I've had an opportunity down through history and just learning from them, from their seat of authority, some of the things they went through. And so let me just approach it from that point, because I was writing down some history that I just really was thinking about. Years ago, the succession plan, back in the old days, you went back 20 years. Let me go back 40 and 50 years, where they had assistant pastors. You don't hear about assistant pastors anymore because they found that to be a divisive term. There was a time where the pastor would rule in such a way. There was assistant pastors, and they changed to assistant to the pastors. Now you have associate pastors. Many times because in people's mind, there was a succession to that pastor through that assistant pastor. Sometimes it worked and many times it did not. Sometimes there was division in the church just because of the title, because people in their own mind perceived succession, that if something happened to the pastor, then you'd have pastors who stayed on and on and on, who never retired and died in the pulpit. And then there was chaos in the church because there was no named successor, because they did away with the assistant pastor, so to speak. I'm going back to my great uncle, Bishop John Silas Holly in Chicago, Illinois, and he pastored a long time, started in 1920, 21, became one of the first district elders in the Pentecostal of the world back in that time, developed such a relationship. There was, of course, everybody knows about Dr. Horace Smith. Well, Dr. Horace Smith was just a doctor. He didn't want anything to do with minister or pastor, but God called him to pastor on the deathbed, so to speak, of Bishop Holly. And he was chosen. And then, of course, there was a son there that had been working with his father. It did not work out. The people chose Bishop Smith, and the rest is history. I had a chance to be with him in the Joint College of Bishops in Cleveland, Ohio, this past March. He came, and I happened to be his, I basically was his, what you call it, his adjutant. I told him, let me be your adjutant for these 3 days. Let me carry your people, let me talk. And I got from his spirit and his mind so many things that he discussed of history. There's so much history that's even in this panel here, the discussion today. I looked on Bishop Henry Johnson. I had a privilege to preach for him years ago there in Fresno, and I see his successor there. And I say to you, there are some who are chosen. Let's go back. Somebody mentioned you, Bishop Noah Jones. Bishop Jones was to succeed Bishop McMurray when Bishop McMurray knew that he was sick and that he, if not recovered, he wanted Bishop Noah Jones. He had, unbeknownst to many, I got this from Bishop Wagner himself. He wanted Bishop Wagner to come to California and to succeed him. But Bishop Wagner would not do that. Bishop Jones, of course, was in Texas and had a very thriving ministry. But because of his national persona and the platform that was built in California, Bishop McMurray, he accepted that, and the rest is history. So, but then I've seen, on the other hand, Bishop Morris E. Goller, and we're going back now, Bishop Morris E. Goller. I can call Bishop, even Bishop Wagner. They did not name the successors. And one thing that I was really amazed at, because Bishop Wagner said no one is a success until they choose their successor. Well, he turned his succession over to his board and turned it over to the church. It was in his bylaws. He would not let the bishop come in from the diocese. Many times in the Pentecostal of the world, they allow the bishop of that diocese to come and make the term and set the table, so to speak. But Bishop Wagner did not want the diocesan to come in. He wanted the church to decide and to choose. So he turned it over to the board. And that was quite a battle there after he passed away, because he did not say, this one's going to succeed me. He had mentored so many young men and so many, Bishop Wagner was a mentor, and he mentored so many pastors He mentored so many people, just not men, but women as well. And his church was full. He had 62 when I was there. I served under him for 9 years. And when I was there, he had close to 62 ministers. Well, the conundrum was he did not make a choice. And when he passed away, the church had to go into a place to choose a successor, which the church, of course, now just anointed or appointed and consecrated Bishop Sean Tyson now as a new bishop, who took that church and were blessed by that. Bishop Golder did not have one, and that church has gone through some turmoil. It had to go through 2 or 3 pastors, and now Bishop Hairston, he's got the church there in Indianapolis. My father, just close to home, my father didn't choose a successor, and the church was just in somewhat of turmoil, but there was a stabilizing factor of the diocesan bishop who came in, Bishop Richard D. Howell, who is now the assistant presiding bishop, Pentecostal of the world, just elected, so a great man of honor. The church went into they have a board of, what do you call that, a committee?
Search committee.
Church, thank you very much. A search committee. And when he got wind, and I called him, I'm just telling you my personal history. My mother was there. My mother served my dad for many years. And my dad had quite a bit of legacy there. Everything was paid for. The church was paid for, the school, properties, and so on and so forth. And so there were men and there were people who were chopping at the bit to get in there. So they would get into this search committee. People would put their applications in. And so, and I'm just telling you from what happened in history. My mother worked there. She was fine with whatever they're doing. She was a part of that. But then Bishop Howell, I called him because my dad died it was 13 years ago this year. He passed away in September, late September. The homegoing was in first week in October. And then by February, the church was still in a kind of searching committee. And I called, the Lord spoke to me, and I called. I'm not trying to spiritualize it. I'm just telling you what happened. I called Bishop Howell, who was over the search committee, over the church, who's coming in and out. And I said, Bishop, I said, my mother's there. She stood by his side for many years. She has all the qualifications to lead the church to the next time through this time period. And he jumped up. Well, I can hear him on the phone say, he said, that's what the Lord told me, the same thing. So he appointed my mother as interim pastor. And then he appointed her as pastor. Of course, my sister worked with my mother, and my sister was the one that worked with my father the last year of his life, and she did a lot of ministry. And he would get up and say, I don't know who's going to take the church. It may be a woman. But he was prophesying, he was laying down a foundation for people to understand you have to make a adjustment. You're going to have to make a pivot maybe. But I'm not going to be here. But there is a possibility that there will. Of course, she now pastored the church, and she's doing a wonderful job. But he did not choose a succession. My point is there are many. Bishop Arthur Brazier groomed his son. As you're being groomed, Dr. Hairston, he groomed his son to take the church. Byron's doing an excellent job in Chicago with all the things. He came in and worked. So I can see on both sides, and I know I'm taking a little extra time, but I'm saying there are two sides. And I was wondering why these great men, Bishop Golder, Bishop Holly, my dad, Bishop Wagner, Bishop J. Johnson there, Bethesda there in Indianapolis, why did they not choose they pastored many years, over 40, 50 years. Why didn't they choose a successor? And then the thought came to me when I saw the church packed out. The last time my dad was in that service, they lifted him up in the wheelchair. People were standing around the walls from Chicago. The church was packed out, and it came to me. He did not want to see the church divided. Had he chose a pastor, because the church and the influx of the church would have been divided before he died. He did not want to have the pain of seeing what he built up divided. You see what I'm saying? And so many of maybe didn't want to see the church divided. They wanted a pastor till their last breath. They wanted to see the sight of what God had blessed them to accomplish. in their sight before they passed on. Of course, the wise men, very wise men, didn't have a problem with that. And I count my one who mentored me, who poured into me, Bishop Montgomery, poured a lot into me. He sat down and talked to me a lot of times. And of course, he set the church and had that decision before he transitioned. And so that the church would understand his heart. He gave him his heart, he gave him his spirit. And I just revel at the fact that there are not many churches a lot of churches that will do that. A lot of men like to pastor until they are no longer can see, they no longer can walk. That's their whole job.
Thank you, Bishop Parchia. You brought up some good points, especially towards the end. You were speaking about the last service your father attended, and he just, you observed that he didn't want his work, or he didn't want the actual visual of seeing his work divided and the people divided.
That's my thought. That's what I'm trying to say.
That's a good observation. But with that being said, and so I'm gonna pass it to Pastor Hairston when I ask this question, that that is the case. A lot of times they want, we talked about it in, as Pastor Walters remembers in part one, that it's a form of identity for these founding pastors. It's their life's work. It's who they are. A lot of them started in the 20s. I don't know if you remember Bishop Parchia. I seen a Christian Outlook magazine, and the article was about your father starting the church there in Milwaukee. And
really?
You were a youngster. It was a picture. I don't know how many of y'all were born. I remember you in the picture though. And so we're talking about men that, started churches in their 20s and then, transitioning from this side in their 80s. We're talking about 50 to 60 years, of identity and what that comes with. But I think a lot of times we have to understand, I think the younger generation is understanding that about legacy. And so legacy is more about less about being in the moment. And I remember my wife made this statement in Bible study from someone: legacy is planting a garden that you will never see. And so when we don't have that vision of what it's going to look like 2 or 3 generations away, we can sometimes have that approach that, man, it's mine, and I just don't want to see it, shaken up or going in a different direction. So I'm going to ask the question based on Numbers, the book of Numbers, chapter number 27. And Pastor Brookins, I don't know if you're near, but you're going to be after Pastor Hairston. There we see a succession plan. We see he's coming back. I think he went on another device. Okay, he's coming in. We see a succession plan there between Moses and Joshua in the book of Numbers, chapter number 27. And we see there that Moses realizes he's not going to the promised land, and that he prays to God that, I've been mentoring Joshua, but give me the next leader so that the people will not be without a shepherd. And those was his words. And once Joshua was chosen by God, there was a public ceremony or a public declaration to the nation of Israel, this is who is coming after me. And we don't know the exact years of transition from that point to when Moses died. We can assume that there was some mentoring going on. He gave him duties, I know, to work with the high priest there. And so, Pastor Hairston, and we see a lot of times in succession, there's a voting process. And as Bishop Parchia mentioned, there's a board that appoints someone. The pastor, the founder, dies, and now the board is up to the board to figure out who's going to take over now. In your opinion, is it best to take the Moses approach, that whoever's the leader, God gives him or her the wisdom to pick a successor, or to leave it into the hands of a board or the people to vote?
That's a good question. You're trying to get me in trouble. No, I believe in succession planning. I believe if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I think a lot of times we get into voting and it can start to become a popularity contest. I think anytime you don't have a succession plan, as Bishop Parchia was talking, a lot of times you see chaos after the leader dies. You see churches breaking up. And so when the shepherd's gone, the sheep will scatter. So you see, when there's no plan, there's no setup, that the people will scatter. Funny story. I like the definition you used about legacy, because legacy is about what you leave behind and what carries on after you're gone. And a lot of time, I think we miss the legacy, and we have a lot of pastors who pastor to their die, and they end up killing their work either before they die or after they die, because everything's scattered. And so we don't see the legacy and have the legacy continue on with what they started, because they don't have that. But I see younger pastors today retiring. I had a guy who's retiring. He's about 59 years old, and he's moving on. And a lot of the older pastors like, what's wrong? Something happened? What's going on? Because it's unorthodox and they're not used to that. And it's just like, no, God's called me to do something else. I'm gonna go write books. I'm gonna go tour here. I had another pastor say he wants to retire because he wants to be the grandpa. He wants to be the granddad. He's tired of being the father. Let him be the granddad of the church. Let him be emeritus. Let him come pat the babies, preach once or twice a month, or once a month, or 2 times a quarter. And that familiar role, that family role of a grandpa, he wants to let that happen in the church. Now, in reference to Moses, that's a great text, because Moses chapter 27, like you said, verse 18, we see God calls and tells Moses, Joshua's my guy. You know what I mean? So by that, I looked it up, and I just hit these quick points here. By 18, God chooses Moses. By verse 18, he says he's capable. So God tells Moses Joshua's capable. He tells him to anoint him, and that's all by verse 18. By verse 19, he validates him in front of the people. And so by verse 20, he doesn't just give verbal authority to him, but he tells Moses, by verse 20, he tells Moses, give him some of your power so the people will follow him. So he gives them power and authority. All this while Moses is still going. This is actually an awesome succession plan right here. And then by verse 21, he said he'll be trained by the priest. So he knows he needs more training to hear the voice of God. So by verse 21, he says he'll be trained by the priest Eleazar. And then by verse 23 again, he validates him and affirms him, and it leaves no question to the people who has next.
Exactly. That's good.
There's no scatter. There's no breakup. Everyone has understanding. And it's not just, succession allows for not just the sheep to, allows for the successor to get familiar with the sheep, but it also allows the sheep to get familiar with the successor. So you have a two-way street where everyone's getting comfortable with each other.
Smooth transition.
Yeah, on both sides.
Just right, Pastor Brookins. To my understanding, you were fortunate enough that Bishop Johnson, to my understanding, did present you to the people as the successor. And so I asked the question, do you believe that leaders should take the approach of Moses of letting God choose the leader and they proclaim that to the people, or leave it to a board to decide, or a search committee, or let the people vote?
So, by the way, can you hear me?
I hear you. Good.
All right. So, first of all, we don't want to do anything that's not biblical. So I sit on a lot of panels, and they have a lot of okay discussions, but it ain't biblical. So I don't think any church should be considering anything that's not biblical. So that's kind of the first thing. So the man of God, as anointed as the man of God is, he can fall into pride. He can fall into insecurity. He can fall into a lot of social and emotional things in his later years and the early years that might keep him from doing the will of God. Because we respect the men of God, we tiptoe around when they're in error, because we never want to be seen as diminishing great men, because David is great, even with the Bathsheba incident. He's a great man of God. You follow what I'm saying? So we tiptoe around it, and I think when we tiptoe, it kind of causes us not to be able to broach certain conversations the way we should. Bishop Johnson was in his late 80s when he appointed me pastor. So I applaud Bishop Johnson for hearing the voice of God. He specifically told me that he had prayed on multiple occasions and the oil didn't run out on anyone else. That was from his words. So it wasn't like he was in power into his late 80s and just wanted power and then, oh, I'm getting sick now, let me find someone. He had attempted to go before God. The problem was I was not where I needed to be at the time. So God had not released me to this destiny in this place. Are y'all following it? So Bishop couldn't see me because I wasn't in the place I was supposed to be. So every time he went before God, he couldn't see a successor in the house. He saw great men of God. Even some men of God traveled to meet with Bishop to ask him about, could they take over the church? Could they help him and all that? But the oil never ran out. So when I got reconnected to Bishop Johnson in 2008, I was at it was like a West Coast Jubilee. It was one of the last that we had of its kind. And I was in the audience and the Lord had spoke to me and said, you're going to pastor now. And I thought that I would be pastoring in Los Angeles and really doing a little mission work. Street ministry is where my heart has always been. And so I said I would be helping and then pushing people into churches that were of like faith. That was my thought. Bishop saw me in the crowd, tells my friend Valentino to come get me. I meet him back in the hotel. He says, what are you doing? I tell him where I'm at spiritually, where I'm at ministry and all of that. He says, well, I know you travel each week preaching somewhere, but when you're not, feel free to drive up to Fresno and let's just talk. Let's just chat. Son, I would love to. I said, Dad, you were my first bishop. Because when I came into the PNDC, I was baptized February 14th at Grace Apostolic Temple in 1993. Bishop was the first bishop that I had ever seen. And so I was like, who is this great man of God? At the time, he was in his 70s. So he was already up there. And of course, when Bishop McMurray passes away and then the resident bishop gets an opportunity to put his name in the hat, and then Bishop Johnson takes over California, Hawaii, Nevada, which opens up the door for C.E. Montgomery to step into a place that he had already grown. So you guys know the history. So I started driving up on Friday nights in 2008 just to sit with Bishop and hear the stories of miracles, hear the stories of the founding of a church, hear the stories of what it is to shepherd. And then in the morning, Saturday morning, I would check out of my hotel and drive back to LA. And at the time, I was a member of a church in Los Angeles. And I taught Sunday school and did that every other week. That's what I was doing. Over that time, God allowed for it to become clear to him. So I was sitting in, you guys know I'm a teacher. So I was teaching and I looked down at my cell phone and it's on silent, but it's Bishop. So what's Bishop calling? I teach in the middle of the day, but then it came again, Bishop. So I tell the kids, let me step out. I have to take this call. I step out into the hallway. Bishop says, son, God just gave me a vision. I'm supposed to turn the church over to you. I was not a member of Bethesda. I had only been going up and hearing the visions, helping him with little projects, and I preached at Bethesda a couple of times. The people were completely unaware. That was in March of 2010 when he told me that. I said, well, Bishop, can I pray? Because I'm not hearing the same thing. He said, what do you need to pray for? God talks to me. Why do you need to pray? I said, well, Bishop, I would just like to feel comfortable to step into this because it is a big deal. He said, well, go ahead and pray. In July, I call him back. Bishop, of course, you were right. I am supposed to be in Fresno. I don't know if it's temporary or what. He said, no, it's not temporary. I said, well, I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. So I accepted. He did not say anything until December, the second week of December of 2010. He calls me 2 days before he's going to make the announcement and says, I need you to come up. It's time to announce you. He has a trustee meeting, lets them know this is his call. This is who the Lord's hand is on. We go into the church and he says, just in a nod of confidence, because I'm making this decision because God has told me it. But if you are willing to stand with me, please stand. A lot of the people stood up. Some of the people didn't stand up. At that point, we sent out a message that Bishop had made a decision. They said Bishop was senile. They said he was old and wasn't in his right mind. They said that I had tricked the old man, and for some reason I wanted to come to Fresno and take over this church. At the time, the membership had dwindled down to about 40 solid members. Solid, and when I mean solid, y'all know 5-star membership. That means you come to church, you serve on a team, you give your tithe, you invite other people to church, 5-star membership. And the Sunday after, I thought the church would just be empty. But 120 people showed up, 121 people showed up the next Sunday. Bishop was then there with me through 2011 and most of 2012. And he was sitting in his chair still. We used to put all those thrones on stage. He had a big throne. He sat in the first one. I sat in the second one. And every time I preached, he stood up and pointed. Anytime the people came to him, they said, you got to go talk to your pastor. Bishop gave me almost a year of endorsement and no foolishness. The only thing he didn't let me into was the money. Bishop didn't want me in the money. So he still had a little few things he was holding on to. Yeah, he's making sure I'm right. But ultimately, because of that union, somebody who was believed in the ministry and me wrote me a check for $150,000. I was able to pay off the church right away as soon as I became pastor. A year after Bishop passed, we were able to purchase a daycare. The year after that, we were able to start the second site. By the way, people said that I'm a visionary. That was never my vision. It was Bishop's vision. So the only thing I'm still enjoying the benefits of a man that heard from God, because what we're rolling out at Bethesda is actually what God showed Bishop, which lets me know that there is a consistency and an alignment when God is speaking. God's vision for Israel never changed. And I tell the people of God, he'll kill 1,000 pastors and destroy 1,000 kings just to make sure his people are safe. He'll go through a whole lot of us to make sure his sheep are safe. So we have to be humble enough as men of God to realize that we are under shepherds. You're not the chief shepherd. And that's hard, because guess what? I know right now I can win a whole lot of people to Bethesda if I cheated like some of the brothers do. If I went to them and made them connect to me, if I went to them and made them think I was some godly visionary that was so deep that they had to connect to me. I don't want you to connect to me first. I want you to connect to Christ. And I want to teach you how to follow me as I follow Christ, because when the Lord moves me off the scene, you're going to continue to walk and sow in the ministry he planted you in with faithfulness. I also have to make sure that there's multiple voices that are speaking across the platform without the people knowing that it's still one voice. So for the first 8 years before COVID, I prepared every lesson for the ministers at our church that preach across the pulpit. There wasn't any messages where I made them go and study themselves and have to come up with something. No, I want you to be successful. It's important that you deliver it like this. It's important that you walk and you look on the right side or the left side. You missed that point, son. I want you to be in it. And that's some of the training I got from Easter-Hairston.
Excellent.
That's all. So my point is, all of that training that I got at Grace Apostolic Temple from Wilfred Hairston, sitting around the table. Terry knows I'm telling the truth. Me, him, Tally, opening up the Bible, him pulling the coattail when I exhort too long, and then saying, but you know what, that was good. All of that, I do it now. And so now when these young men, I had a minister now, you guys could go on our Facebook account on Bethesda Churches. You'll see 2 young men there teaching. They're probably kind of stumbling through some of the teaching. I put them on the air. They're on the air. They're on the radio. I put them on the radio because they got to stumble through it. Yes, you got to go through the hard. But guess what? When I stand up in front of this generation, even when I cut my hair and try to look younger and put on skinny jeans and try to wear fancy sneakers, I am not this generation. They are this generation. So I have to teach them. And the last thing I want to say, we have to make sure that the secret sauce of being apostolic is kept from vessel to vessel. Because sometimes I don't know who we are, quite frankly.
Yes, sir.
Are we oneness anymore?
My God.
Are we Jesus' name anymore? Is it necessary? If it's not necessary, let's say that, because I go through a whole lot of drama every Sunday trying to convince people that you have to be baptized in Jesus' name. But if we don't believe that anymore, and if you can just make a confession of faith, then let's say that, because we continue to parade people on our stages on the natural forum who are not saved by our own standards. So if we're going to have a generation of legacy, we have to make sure that the secret sauce is there, so that although they may not look like, I kind of want them to look. I told our young people, listen, I can't get with that. I don't know about this with the little shoes and the ankles. And I don't know. That's not the way I came into Grace Apostolic Temple. It's kind of different for me. But when they go out, nobody is saying nothing about it. The only people they get grief from is some of us, you know, who don't like that. For me, I need an organ in the church. That's me, though. I'm realizing I'm the one that like to shout. I'm the one that like to dance. But the people of God that's coming in now, they're just doing this lifting the hand stuff, and I'm beating them up. When Ryan, my youth pastor, who is my successor, everyone knows it, when he gets up, he's able to finesse them in a different way, and they still end up in a shout in a different way, and folks still get baptized. So what I'm realizing is that we have had the Bishop Johnson thing needs to happen more often, where men of God say, you, the oil is on you, and I'm going to do everything from finance to teaching to mentoring to release you into that. And when you fall, I'm not going to take the opportunity to kill you, because it takes God 40 years to build up a man of God and people 40 seconds to destroy him. So we have to make sure that we're protecting our legacy as well.
Amen.
Thank you, Pastor. Man, we had the offering now. Yes, sir. I enjoyed those words. I enjoyed that. Pastor Chino, you want to piggyback on?
Listen, they hit the nail on the head. I'll say this just in brief, brief statement. I think, you know, when it comes to succession, your question, you know, should, you know, that predecessor appoint their successor, or should it be a board or a church, whatever it might be. And I think the voting process is a fallback. And I said fallback, you know, because you look at succession has multiple models. You have your sonship model, you have your congregational model, you got Episcopal model, you got, you know, a congregational model, you have a search committee model, church model, so on and so forth. But you have to look at the dynamic of that ministry to determine what is best. And in this case here in Pastor Brookins, you know, I think that relay succession approach is more ideal. When you look at Numbers 27, that is the model of relay succession. Although Moses was not blinded, because he had already had in his heart and his mind, Joshua is my guy. So much so, I've already been training him. I've already been mentoring. I've already been giving little nuggets here and there. But I need God to confirm his man. And I think I think those principles there are necessary to ensure that we put the right people in place. The Lord comes and gives the confirmation. And what I love about the model is that Moses doesn't just fall off the scene. There's a relay process, just like Pastor Brookins was saying, you know, although that relay may have been only a year, but what he said was so valuable was that The senior pastor, he remained in his seat, but he remained in his seat giving affirmation that this is the next guy. Matter of fact, this is the guy. And I think a lot of times in the Black Pentecostal church, we fail to understand the value of that. You know, if you're going to be a successor, how much more success will you have when the predecessor is still living and validating you in front of the congregation? A lot of our churches, they're personality driven. And if the founding pastor or that senior pastor is still alive and is endorsing the next guy, most likely the congregation, even the ones that didn't support the call, most likely because of their faithfulness to the senior pastor, they're going to learn to eventually, sway to the left. Understand this is our next, this is our Joshua. He's the one that's going to lead us on. And so I think we have to consider all the models and look at what's more successful. And I may be biased. I believe relay succession is the best. I believe it's important for that predecessor to appoint. And that can be, and I love the way Pastor Brookins gave his example or his real live experience, because it shows that the appointment does not have to always be internal. It can be external. And as long as there is a period of mentorship, there's a period of pouring into that predecessor or that successor, I believe, of course, the Lord being ultimately the guide and the one who points and selects the leader. But I believe that our churches will be more successful, especially after our founding fathers or our senior pastors leave. And so I just wanted to piggyback on that, that is awesome because it's rare. I'm gonna let you know it's rare. In my research, a lot of our transition is because of incapacitation, bedside transition, or somebody steps out and walks away, and now the congregation is without a pastor for 12 months to 3 years, and we just have to find somebody. And then that's where the Episcopal model steps in, or the congregational model. Well, let's just roll a dice. Let's vote on somebody. You look like you might be a good pastor, and you pick somebody because of the inconvenience. But if we learn that this is not our thing, and I think Pastor Brookins alluded to that, and I like to call it steward leadership. If we learn as pastors the importance of steward leadership, not necessarily servant leadership, but steward leadership suggests that everything we have, we don't own. It belongs to an owner who has entrusted us to be custodians. And if he has entrusted us to be custodians, we have to do what the owner would do. In this situation, what would the owner do? Would the owner wait until he can't think? Would the owner wait until, he doesn't have cognitive ability to pass down or to mentor or to invest? Or would the owner consider the next generation and the generation after that? And if that's the way the owner does it, then you and I as pastors, we have to take on that same approach and say, well, Lord, who is the next man? Who should I be mentoring? How do I go about ensuring that I'm fortifying and preparing the next to carry on that dynasty, that legacy, and that dynasty, not just an individual, but that legacy, that gospel? And I can stay on this soapbox for a long time, because you're absolutely right. What are we passing down? Are we preserving the apostolic faith? Are we preserving, the very thing that we grew up under? Because what I see today is questionable. And so we have to be mindful that, succession is more than just putting a man in the spot, but it's also preserving the gospel. It is also passing down what has been taught to our fathers to the next generation. And so a lot of our fathers may be apprehensive in passing down the mantle, but the question has to become, has that individual that you're apprehensive of passing the mantle down, has they been mentored? Have they been mentored? Have they been poured into? Because if they're poured into, then you can have that Moses and Joshua situation where Moses, oh, I'm good. I know this is the guy. God's spirit is in this man. And matter of fact, I have been pouring into him as well. So I think it's a combination of both. But, just wanted to say, man, that's certainly it's rare that we see things that Pastor Brookins especially in a Black Pentecostal church. It's rare that we see it like that.
Mhm. Man, good, Pastor Chino. Before I get to you, Bishop Parchia, Pastor Brookins, I did not realize you were not a member of Bethesda. When we had that encounter at Bethesda in 2009, it was Pentecost Sunday. I remember, because Bishop Johnson, in his older age, I mean, I've never heard preaching like that before in my life. I was like, this older, it's Bishop Johnson. He's going to get up and, kind of fumble through. And I mean, I was in tears. We was both on the front row. I was in tears, man. It was the most powerful Pentecost Sunday I ever experienced. And so at that point, I did not realize, I thought at that point you were the youth chairman. I did not realize you were not even a member. So that's really, like Pastor Walters had stated, that really unusual, for the man of God to go before God and pull somebody from the outside and say, this is the man. So that's a blessing.
Let me say this. Is there anything more important to God than his sheep?
That's it.
Think about that. There's nothing that I can think of more important to God than his people. So why would he put his people in jeopardy by not speaking to the man of God about what he wants to do? So either I'm not listening, I'm carnal, I'm in a foggy space, because God is going to speak about those things that are most important to him. Now, at Bethesda churches, we teach what's called the line of truth, and that is from Genesis to Revelation. God has exposed everything that you need to know for life and godliness. And if he didn't mention it, you don't need to know it. You don't need to know about global warming. You don't need to know about aliens. You don't need to know about all of that. You can explore it if you like, but he has deemed it not important to his story. The body of Christ is his story. So certainly he's going to speak to Bishop Johnson. He's going to speak to all of these others who didn't put someone in place, and they might not have wanted to release it. And only God will know that in judgment. Yes, sir.
Let me ask you this, and then Bishop Parchia probably can pick up on this question. With that being said, because I truly believe that, the sheep is God's prized possession. It's Christ's prized possession. Absolutely. And this is why there's such a terrible, how would I say, a judgment upon the pastors that scatter his sheep. So we understand that importance. With that being said, and knowing that these men of God do have a relationship with God, our sainted fathers, the Bishop Parchias, the Bishop Montgomerys, the Bishop Wagners, and so on and so forth, but because, as Bishop Parchia alluded to, because they didn't appoint anyone, the question becomes why? Is it because, I mean, in my mind, I'm thinking, I know they've heard something. I know God has gave them a glimpse. Is it because of, yes, sir.
I think I can answer that. As I was reflecting on Pastor Brookins and you were saying, and I love your enthusiasm, both of you, and the ability to articulate the vision and to see the sight of God in every story in the Bible concerning this particular issue. Let's get the 3 letters, ego. Is ego before or ego after? There's ego even when one chooses. Thank you for that example, Pastor Brookins, because you were a spiritual son developed by Bishop Johnson, though you did not know it. He was pouring into you. You mentioned the fact that you got saved under that ministry, under his preaching. You were anointed right then to succeed what God had you to succeed in him. And God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes works from a distance. It works in ways we don't know that he's working, but he's working. As you have mentioned, when we're not sight unseen, when we're not in tune to what he's working behind the scenes for our benefit, as you have stated. So clearly, the insight and the foresight and the present sight of God to have you stationed in a place where you were not seen by the people or the masses, but God had you protected to such time. So when Bishop called you and said, you're the one, you may not have been placed where you can see, well, God, you had to question that because it took you by surprise. But God's working, he's working, he's working. And so it's important that but it's about the ego. When I say ego, and I mentioned different people that did not, or pastor, senior pastor who did not choose a successor, it would maybe because they wanted to hold on. And some, maybe perhaps, maybe they perceived, knowing the scripture, they knew Moses and Joshua, they knew the succession plan, Elijah, Elisha. I teach a course on servanthood and serving of the spiritual leader and getting the spirit of a leader. And they're very faithful. Paul to Timothy and so on and so forth. There's something that God has orchestrated, ordained, and sometimes men get in front of God or get behind God on purpose. When I'm saying that is that when Bishop McMurray, for instance, let me go into, because I know that story of Bishop McMurray, and in fact, Bishop took me down there at that funeral. I'll never forget his going, and Bishop Brazier, who preached that message. But Bishop McMurray had chosen Bishop Noah Jones, and he wanted somebody to not only leave his legacy, but carry it on to even a greater way. And that's part of ego, because he had the choice. He developed many, David Horn and others that came up under his ministry he could have chosen, but he wanted his ministry to go to another level that those that he had even mentored probably could, because he was a showman. He was a man that that was everybody could see, he knew. And so he needed somebody on a different level. All right. Bishop Johnson, my perception, very humble, very conservative, very thoughtful, a very thinking man. I was privileged to be in his presence and hear him speak in a personal way. He needed someone like himself that could project what he believed in his beliefs. So all of that comes full circle. And those who did not choose a successor, it could have been, my ego says, I want to see what I see until I'm gone. Bishop Brisbane, God bless his soul, he was a presiding bishop there in Minnesota. He had dementia. I talked to one of his assistants who left. He would get and preach the same sermon. He'd forget where he was, but he had enough mind, because church was in. He's a churchman, and just get me to church, get me in front of the pulpit, and automatic. He was on automatic. He preached the same sermon every Sunday for about 60, and the people knew he's aggressively demented as far as his mind is diminished, but because of his stature in that church and because what he had built, there was no confrontation there, and until the people started leaving, as you said. So he never had a successor, and the church went down due to dementia. But it comes back to, I think, Moses got in trouble because of his ego. Moses got in trouble because of his ego. So every leader has to have a healthy ego of some sort, but it's how you direct that ego. How you, as a spirit, is it come from God? I'm under you, Lord, and my ego, I have to put it under subjection. The prophet, king, and priest David did, as you mentioned, though he was a sin in Bathsheba. We know the story. He was a righteous man, but he always knew how to get his ego under control and give it to God, and let God lead through him. And so it's important that we say on both sides. I'm saying on both sides. It sounds like somebody else, but there's ego on every side. But how is that ego subjected to the will of God? Is it under subjection to God's spirit? Or am I going to flaunt my spirit against God? And that's when Moses got in trouble for. He's supposed to speak to the rock, and he hit the rock. And there's a great revelation in that, because he was, as Pastor Brookins said, he was hitting the people of God. He was hitting the glory of God. He was trying to share that glory, but he was hitting the glory to be him. He put himself on the level with God. And that time, God said, you're not going to enter in. He had already chosen Joshua. Joshua had always been chosen. And even Moses knew that Joshua was going to, didn't know how it was going to happen, but he knew at that time. So your question, did I answer your question, D'Amico?
Pastor Walters.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I think you certainly you made a valid point as far as that ego. Basically what side of the equation is that ego. And I think that also falls into some of the other areas that are challenges for the Black Pentecostal church. That ego, or in fact, it could be very well not willing to step down because there's so much prestige and identity behind that seat. I see Pastor Brookins has his hand out, and I'll say this: what I've also found out that even in that ego approach, some of our pastors, in the Black Pentecostal church that that do stay for a long period of time, or they do die in the pulpit, a lot of times it's because there's a financial application behind it. A lot of times, there's no planning for their future. There's no retirement. And so they try to hold on to that bit or that baton as long as they can, even when God may have showed them their successor 10 years prior to. But because, there's a house, there's a stipend, there's this, there's, how do I relinquish that natural benefit? And this is why I believe it's so important when you start doing your succession planning, retirement should be a part. One thing about the other Pentecostal churches that may not be of the Black persuasion, if you will, there are other Pentecostal churches, Apostolic churches that I know personally, even doing my research and doing interview. Within 10 years, they give them 10 years to have set up a succession plan, and they have also 10 years of investments or retirements already developed. And what they train their pastors that once you become a pastor, listen, you're not going to be here for the rest of your life. So in that moment, whether it's just small monies that the church can afford, you need to start setting money aside, because we don't want the financial piece to be a hindrance to the proper succession and handoff. And I can speak more to that, but I just want to make mention of that.
That's good. Just right quick, Bishop Parchia, I know Pastor Walters has a hard stop in about 15 minutes, so it's only, and I'm glad
Pastor Brookins had his hand up.
I see it. That you went into that about the financial, because that was my next question. So Pastor Brookins, if you don't mind, because I want to give everybody ample time to speak, that I'm going to get to you. I'm going to give Pastor Terry about 2 to 3 minutes to speak on that, about the financial piece. And you being the associate pastor, and you are going to succeed your father eventually. What is those conversations like as far as the finances? Because a lot of times we have even pastors coming on, the founder's still there. The founder wants his 6 figures still. House paid for, car note, private schools, whatever is coming with that. And so we have a pastor that is now in place that has to work 15 hours a day and then come pastor. So what is that? I'll let you go ahead and speak on that for about 2 to 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in a unique situation where I'm the associate pastor, and I'm not taking a salary, not taking any money. And that's fine. I tell people sometimes I feel like a Hebrew slave, because I do a lot of the work. I'm preaching 2 to 3 Sundays a month. I do a majority of the Bible studies also. So I'm doing a lot of work, but not getting paid for it. But when I first came, because I didn't originally go with my father when he started his church, when God told me to go help my father, that's when I came to the church. And my dad thought I was coming just to be his organist. Lord told me to go, and the Lord told me he would take care of my finances. So I've been financially blessed beyond measure than I can even imagine. I'm good that way. And I understand that. But I know it can be hard for a lot of people to labor and not get paid. See the musicians get paid and not get paid. The head pastors get paid and you don't get paid. We pay for our media and you don't get paid. So yeah, that can be tough for a lot of people, but God told me he would take care of me, and he's done that. So I've had that unique situation where I've not needed or requested to be paid. But yeah.
That's good. Yep. Pastor Brookins.
So I just want to go back to Bishop Walters. Is it Bishop Pastor? Is it Pastor?
Don't get him in trouble.
It's not a bit.
Ain't no
Okay,
bishop.
Pastor. Okay, so back to that question, and then I'll do the financial piece. Yes, ego, but also distraction. We have set up in our organizations a lot of distractibility. If I sit on my council's committee and I am the coordinator of the council, and then I'm the suffragan bishop for my council, and then I sit on this board at the national level, and then I go to all the midwinners, I go to all of the Edon Bible College. It takes a unique circumstance to be able to do all of that. And pastoring is going to be very difficult. You're going to have a blind spot. You're going to miss the discipleship of the sheep. There's no way. I mean, I'm like amazed at people's ability to go all over the place and not have a solid assimilation program at their church delivered over by trusted people that you have mentored to make sure that while you're going to all of this stuff, that discipleship is taking place. The reason why the people won't follow when you point to that other person is because you haven't trained them. You haven't taught them. You haven't groomed them in God's word to understand that no matter who's coming in, God has a word for your life. No matter who's singing, we lift our hands. No matter who's playing, we're still going to worship God. If it's a video track, we worship God. If it's an accompaniment track, we worship God. If it's a cappella, we worship God. That's not being trained in the assimilation programs. So then, yes, I'm nervous as a pastor to turn the church over because I have not trained the people how to have a biblical, apostolic, Acts 2 mindset about what church is. Now, in 2 Timothy, I don't have my glasses, but it says in verse 2, and these things that thou hast heard of me among many witnesses, the same commit to faithful men who shall be able to teach others. That's 4 transitions of God's word from one group to another. And it has to keep its sanctity. About the financial piece, when Bishop turned the church over, he still was taken care of. And yes, it did mean, Brother Walters, that there was some double work. But there is no way to dishonor the founder and the man of God who has sown and decided to go out on E. My generation said, listen, we ain't going out on E. So I'm the principal of a middle school. I'm well paid to do that. The district pays me to do ministry. So my generation is having a different kind of conversation. We're looking at other streams of income and stuff like that. Like, I'm not putting my life into the hands of the saints only. That's kind of been our mindset. So we have a lot of little things going, got a little track, got a rap album on the side, got a book, got a this. So sometimes people say, these pastors, they forever selling something. But it's because it's like, I got to get a stream coming in because the first lady love y'all, but she's looking like, when we going to get a new couch? All right. So that sacrifice that the previous 2 generations did, our generation is saying, come on, y'all, let's keep it real. That's not right. And when you look at the salaries of most of our pastors, they are not in alignment. And I know Pastor Walters has done research. They're not in alignment with somebody who is qualified, trained, education level should be receiving. Now, Bishop taught us that if you don't do the Great Commission, you don't get commission.
Right.
And he also taught us that the coin is in the fish's mouth. So Terry has that mindset because I came up under Grace Apostolic. So our mindset is like, if we do the ministry, the Lord gonna cover. What happened is when the Lord covered, we were not smart about our finances. And we didn't have a 403B. We didn't know how to invest in stocks. We did not know how to open up a nonprofit and get grant money and state money and other types of money coming into the church so that we didn't have to depend on tithe and offering only. So because a pastor, I'm anointed to preach. I'm not anointed always to be an accountant. I'm not anointed always on how to start a business, how to run a business, how to market. And this is the reason why ego, if it gets in the way, I won't release the gifts that the Lord is sending into the space to bolster those streams of income. You know, we just received another grant. You know, the Lord blessed this grant to do what we already do. We already tell people about drug prevention. I'm always preaching about stop smoking that crack and all of that. So I mean, we already got that in our system. Now we're getting paid, grant paid toward. So so I would say that not having access to those resources, the knowledge or the wisdom of those resources has kept some, Pastor Walters, in place well too long and listen, maybe I wouldn't be here if Bishop knew that he could have got a $500,000 grant to do whatever. He said, wait a minute, I don't need this guy. I just get the $500,000 grant and preach till I die. But I just wanted to emphasize the financial piece has to come from multiple streams. We have to think outside of the box, because if you're just existing on tithe and offering and you're doing ministry, that might not be the wisest approach in this season.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Brookins. I know, Pastor Walters, you have a hard stop in about 5 minutes, so this is what I want to do is probably just wrap up to this last question, which is how important is it for the predecessor, and this pertains to church leadership and a pastor situation as well, to leave, you talked about relay succession, to pass that mantle down. You believe it should be at the height. Bishop Noah Jones spoke on this, that he believes his succession will take place at the height of his ministry, not as it's declining. So how important is
too late. He's already missed the height.
He missed
Bishop, and I love Bishop. I love Bishop. Bishop is my dude. I love him. I don't drink tea with him, but I have mimicked everything that he does. He's already missed the height of his ministry.
Right.
Yeah.
So
he did
for
make
him
a
to make
statement
that
20 years ago.
But
gone.
He had a succession plan in maybe 15 years ago. He had a guy come in that he was going to pass the ministry on, but that didn't.
The guy started a church. Yeah, he started a church, Resurrection Church. It's a big church.
Yeah, he's
got a lot of people over there.
Yeah, he split his church. So so I guess he felt he better hold on a little while longer. But I think he's coming to that point now, because he's doing a lot of international missions and ministry too. So I think he just sold his church. I think he said he bought it. He said this in convention last week. He bought it for $3 million or $4 million, put another $4 million, maybe up to $5 million to the warehouse that he get in Carson City. Pastor Brookins sounds like he knows all about that. And he just sold it for $50 million. So he's already on that other side doing some things. So I'm going to add that.
So Pastor Walters, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'll answer real quick so I get ready to go. But yeah, I think if we look at the classical definition and from a practical perspective, that relay succession, you always want to pass that baton at the height, of the predecessor's ministry. You're passing at the height of the predecessor ministry while that successor is gaining that momentum as well. I think, you know, Miko, you ran track before. I'm not sure if anyone else on the call ran track before. You've been in a relay race before. And that's one of the main things they teach you, you know, especially if you run a 4x1, you know, you better not pass that baton while you're both standing still. And unfortunately, you know, in our culture, we've seen a lot of that. We've seen the baton passed down, absolutely, but it's the predecessor is dragging. He's not even walking anymore. And so what happens is the momentum that the successor would have had, he has to stop, get the mantle, regain his focus, regain his sauce, if you will, and then try to run. By that time, you know, he's already lost, you know, his confidence. He's already lost, you know, his vision. He has to regain that. And so absolutely, I think the best way to ensure that that the gospel is passed down appropriately, that the churches are successful after the predecessor or the founding pastor leaves, I think that transition should be done at the height of the predecessor and at the momentum point of that successor. If it's done that way, then the predecessor, he has the value, or I'll put it like this, he benefits twofold. One, he gets to see the fruit of his labor with cognitive ability and good health and strength. He also gets the opportunity to be a real father to that son, because now he's as a cloud of witness, if you will. He's in the background rallying that pastor on, saying, you know, you go, you know, I'm here to help you. You're going to fall. You're going to make a mistake. But because I'm still around, it's still my job to ensure that you're successful. And so, yes, I think they have to run in tandem for a period of time. And I believe you have to pass it at your height and not at your lowest point. So God bless everybody. I'm so sorry. I gotta get off. This has been fruitful. I certainly appreciate the opportunity, D'Amico. Blessings to you, Pastor Hairston. Blessings to you, Pastor Brookins and Bishop Parchia. God bless you all. And hopefully one day we can connect one day and see each other in person. God bless everybody.
So if you see the chat, Pastor Brookins left a message for you.
Okay, I got your number. Absolutely. I'll give you a call. I need a 500,000 grant.
You know,
So I'm gonna give you a call.
I'm gonna call you Pastor Chino. I'm gonna call you. I'm gonna hit you up too.
Oh, yes, sir. I'm gonna leave my phone number in the chat. I'll leave my phone number in the chat. Absolutely.
All right, appreciate you.
You're brilliant. Can I say something before you close out?
Yes, it's on you. I wanted you to speak on the financial piece as well, but it's on you.
Let me not forget what I was going to say. I was going to say, we're talking about the height of pastor ministry and the prime that their successor be. You know, many of our pastors in their height and their prime have mentored so many great men and women of God, and they go out and start working ministries. That's part of their legacy, and that's part. Sometimes they choose one of those, and sometimes they don't. But the point is, I'm thinking about about the financial. And my father was an excellent businessman, and so the church, like I said, was left in good shape. That's why it was so sought after by other bishops, if you please, up with the Suffragan bishops and whatnot, because it wasn't financial. He was a great businessman, and he was known. I think he got up one time in the bishop board and said, well, you know, I'm a millionaire. This was years and years ago, because Bishop Wagner told me this. But I have to tell you this, Bishop Johnson told me, I don't know if he told me and told Bishop Montgomery at the same time, or maybe was passed on through Bishop Montgomery, but he said, talking about succession, he said, if a young man goes out and starts a ministry and he leaves and he does poor, not doing very well. So, Pastor, how's so-and-so doing? How's so-and-so doing? And they said, well, y'all pray for him. Y'all pray for him. But if another young man goes out, maybe the same time, whatever, and church just blows up and everything, but say, how's that young man doing? Oh, he's doing good. That's one of my sons. And I never forgot that. That's one of my people. That's one of my sons. The other fella, he's kind of putting thumbs down on and said, well, pray for him. he didn't take credit for them being the son, but the other fella, oh, that's one of my sons.
Mhm.
I thought that was so. When you talk about the height of your ministry, I think the height is mentoring and those going out from under you. And if that pastor dies, transitions, and his mentees continue to move forward, that's part of his legacy as well. And that's part of that. But I agree with you. Chino made a good example. I think Pastor Brookins maybe made it, that it's because they want to hold on to that bag. Everybody's talking about the bag now. So that pastor hold on to that bag. He's got grandchildren, great grandchildren, and he wants to make sure they have good Christmases. So many times, back to the ego, they hold on and they not have prepared. They have not prepared. And those pastors who are very successful now, we ain't even gonna talk. Nobody's on the level with Jake's. Jake saw that years ago. He was a businessman. Jake's he tells about his story when he was poor, but Jake's has got he's almost like what this fella is, Ted Turner. He's probably got land between California and the East Coast. He's got land all over the place, and he has thought that big. He's thought globally, and probably in other lands and other places, because he prepared for that, and he suffered to get to that point. And he's adept enough in business. Why Jakes has people on his board that's not in his church. He's got businessmen people on his board that's not even corporate leaders on his board. That's how forward thinking he is. So business is a part of it. I'll leave it right there.
Good. Thank you, Bishop Parchia. Pastor Hairston.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. No, I think they need to leave on top. I think the problem is I call it the Tom Brady effect. They don't know when they're on top and when to stop.
Yeah.
Tom Brady could have retired after he won the Super Bowl. But, like all of us, they think there's a little more in the tank. They think I can still do this, I can still do that. And from us, from someone receiving the successor standpoint, no one wants nothing that's dead. You don't want to have to revive something. Don't give me nothing that's dead. Like, I might as well go start something brand new myself if it's dead. So I think what you talked about in the book of Numbers and everything, and that succession plan to Moses and Joshua and the validation. Are we wrapping up now? This is the end here. We're just wrapping up.
Yeah, this is a wrap-up session.
Okay, yeah. I'll just say I heard a theme, and I love what Chino said about stewardship. How Pastor Chino, we're just supposed to steward, and we think sometimes it's about us, and it's not. I love what my brother Pastor Tobaise said about not just the egos and stuff, but the succession plan, and hearing his story and testimony, how he took over and how there was that validation in there. Even Christ was validated. When he was baptized, the Lord spoke and said, "This is my son in whom I'm well pleased." That's validation and affirming right there in the middle while Jesus is being baptized. So now Jesus can go forth in ministry being validated. And that was a audible voice. Everyone there could hear, like, whoa, we getting a word right now. This is that guy. This is him. This is the Son of God right here. And so, yeah, I think validation is important in that success plan. And I agree with my brother, Pastor Tobias. What does the Bible say? What does the word say? We're going to do what the word says, because God's sheep are his most important thing. So, yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. I thank you. I thank you, my brother, for reaching out. Appreciate the opportunity, man. It's been a blessing.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm honored. I appreciate it. We're going to have Pastor Brookins take us home.
Well, I don't know if I can take it home, but I can add a few comments, and that is, first, I do want to thank you for inviting me on. It's been a pleasure. I get jazzed up. I felt like I was, like I said, Terry, back at your dad's house around the dinner table.
You remember
that's
the day? Yes,
that's what it used to be like. But so I would love to be invited back, in anything you're doing. You got me in. I would say that in terms of when to turn it over, obviously it's on top. Pastor Hairston hits it on the head. You don't know what the top is. In February of 2020, we were 2 years into our third site. I threw a Super Bowl party. There were people all over the place. And I felt like Job and said, I will die in this nest. This is the most wonderful. Look at all these souls. And then
COVID hit.
COVID.
Yeah.
And I have hindered our church because I haven't been able to come to resolve of what actually happened. I was mad with God, mad with everybody. I'm like, what in the world is this? We have put $90,000 into this space to renovate it out, to get it what it needs to be, a lot of it of my own money. And this is for souls to be won. No, we not shutting down. We moving on. And the Lord just allowed. So now you got to close it down. We probably should have closed it down 9 months ago. But my ego and me I couldn't let it go. I couldn't see that the Lord can minister in so many different ways.
Right.
Tobaise, you on the radio. Tobaise, you on TV. You got social media. It was hard for me to accept that every time I drove past that place up the street. I like church a certain way because that's the way it was presented to me when I came into the church. I admit that to my congregation, and I'm saying it on your platform. I like hand clapping, foot stomping. I like to run laps around church. I like to dance. I like to jump. I like to do some ridiculous things. I mean, I've done front flips in church. I go crazy in worship.
All right.
So it's hard for me to let go and do succession planning if that's what it has to look like.
Mm-hmm.
Because then I start making all of my young ministers that I'm training now how to hack, how to hum, how to put their finger on their ear, how to tune up right, how to breathe so that they can endure through a 45-minute Pentecostal preaching message so that they know how to have that stamina. My successor, he knows how to do that. Pastor Ryan can shift from teaching to Pentecostal preaching to deep cerebral thought. He's been trained like that. The ones coming in now, they need to talk. They need to speak with power the word of God in a talk. They don't need 45 minutes to do it. They only need 30. They need illustrations. They need a screen in back to match what their word is also presenting. They need to use props. They need to wear jeans and the little jackets. They look like they all sucked up in these jackets. Whatever, that's what they need to connect.
Mm-hmm.
In order for me to see young families coming back into Bethesda in droves, that's what needs to happen. And Peter had the same issue. And he said, Lord, I don't touch or eat anything unclean.
Yep.
And the Lord had to give him a little, hey, what I bless, you don't call unclean. So it should be in the height. I think, though, the man of God has to seek God truly to know when that height is. And with all the praying that we do, I have missed God so many times. I mean, literally, I'm in prayer, but it's possible to pray and not have an effectual, fervent prayer in the right place with specificity. So I'm just praying that in this season, that more and more men of God will seek God specifically on the topic that you've broached.